Good morning. It's great to see you all again. And we're back here at Beit Rab doing another recording of these statements of faith. And we're going to be continuing now on the series of Our World Belongs to God and the section or the part of that that relates to redemption. So I'm going to go ahead and share with you the video that we prepared for you. And if you remember, we ended last time looking at the rainbow, and that's going to be the starting point for our session today. We're going to hear a little bit about the story of Noah. So let's skip forward through this this presentation, and let's see here. If you remember, we looked at all of this last time, and now we are going to look at section 3. We had heard in section 1 that God responded with grace to our fall from the image of God that he had created, and he had this beautiful world he had created that belongs to God. And we fell from that. We fell from this place, this perfect place. And we heard last time that Adam and Eve were sent out of the garden. They experienced the consequence of their sin, but they also experienced a promise of hope. And so we're just going to start from right there, that promise of hope. So when evil filled the earth, God judged with a flood. So again, we have this consequence, something that comes as a result of something else. Consequences for bad behavior, for doing evil, doing wrong. The way that the world is, eventually someone will find out what you did, or maybe the world, something will happen, and God is responsible for making sure that those consequences are there. But with the story of Noah, it's the story of a flood. The consequence in those days when all the people of the earth were doing more and more evil, God made a decision to cause all of the earth to be covered in water. And so a flood is when there is rain, and eventually the water is so high. Here we are on the 7th floor of a building, and it's just going to go higher and higher. There will be nothing left, not even the mountains. That's the kind of flood that God sent on the earth that first time. A flood is when water fills to overflowing and completely covers everything. This is a flood. Recently, there have been these floods in Sudan. The Nile River has flooded Khartoum, and that's been extremely hard on the people there. A flood is a natural disaster. It is something that we see from time to time in small pictures around the world. But the flood that God sent the first time filled the whole earth. Just as the evil filled the earth, the flood of water filled the earth. But he rescued Noah. He rescued Noah and his family and all the animals that God had created of every kind. He rescued them in a way to say that he had not given up. He still had a plan that would bring human beings back into fellowship with God. And then he covenanted with Noah and with all the creatures. To covenant means to make a promise, to make a contract. It is to shake hands, is to say, we will do this and you will do this. And God is saying, I will no longer destroy. I will not destroy all the earth in this way ever again. I will continue to show mercy all the time until I am able to make justice happen and truly redeem human beings. So there's a difference between God's mercy and God's redemption. And God made a promise to Noah at that time and to all the creatures that he would show mercy. He would no longer choose total destruction. He covenanted with all the creatures that seasons would continue and that such destruction would not come again until the last day. So even now, we are before the last day. If history is one long line, at the beginning there was creation, and then there was the fall of human beings, and then the consequence of the fall was that Adam and Eve were sent out of the garden, and we began to experience the more and more consequences, and it got worse, and there was a flood. And eventually, Jesus came and he redeemed us. He made it possible for us to have peace with God. And in the future, there will be this last day when there will be destruction, when the Lord returns and he will make all things new. At that last day, that will be the time when God will really completely close this time of history. So what we see in this section is that God's promises include consequences, but also include mercy. God promised not to repeat the flood and to repeat this kind of global destruction. And he also made a promise at that same time, a covenant, that there would be a final renewal. This was all present in those days with Noah. So there was initially in redemption God's response of grace, and then his mixing consequence and hope, and now a covenant, a promise to all of creation that there would be a new creation and a renewal of the world. And that is the journey that God set out on in his redemption of human beings. So in the next section, we learn that the Lord promised to be with, the Lord promised to be, he would be God to Abraham, Sarah, and their children, calling them to walk faithfully before him and blessing the nations through them. So he promised these things to specific people in history. After Noah, the first major figure in the Bible is Abraham and his wife Sarah and their children. Later on, we find Moses. So the Lord promised to be God to all of them, and he called them to walk faithfully before him, and he would be guiding them so that they could be a blessing to others, a blessing to the nations. God chose Israel, and Israel is the new name of Jacob. So Abraham's son Isaac had a son named Jacob, and Jacob had a new name, Israel, and all of the people after him were the Israelites, or the Hebrew people. God chose Israel to show the glory of his name. Glory is something that is extremely great and beautiful and powerful. So God chose Israel to show the glory of his name, the power of his love, and the wisdom of his ways. The Lord gave them the law through Moses. This was after the people of Israel had entered Egypt. The Lord gave Moses as a leader, and he took the people out of Egypt, and he revealed his law to them. And he led them by rulers and teachers, and he began to shape a people in whom God would be revealed as a light to the nations. So God had a plan. That's what this whole section is about. There's not a lot of difficult words, but it is a picture. And this section teaches us something about God's promise to Abraham and to his people Israel. It teaches us that God's people would be a light to the nations. He saved them, he set them apart, and he gave them his law, and he gave them hope so that they would share that with others. So if you want to pause and just get a quick summary of some of the texts that are part of this, you're welcome to do that here. Before we continue, and just recognize that there is a movement that God is on here. It is as if he set out on a journey, and that journey for redemption, he planned to use a person and people, a nation, to bring blessing and to bring light into darkness. He chose one family line, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the people of Israel. Now, the final section in this picture of redemption in Our World Belongs to God involves Israel, the people, how they were supposed to be a blessing, but they spurned God's love. It was really a tragedy. It was that they spit on, they insulted God. Instead of accepting his love and allowing his love to work in them so that they would be light and blessing to all people, they spurned his love. They said, we don't need that. To spurn is to not receive, but to push away something that someone has given you. It is to, in a very insulting way, reject. It is a very harsh word. When Israel spurned God's love, lusting after other gods, to lust is to want something and to go after something that really you should not have. It is trying to get something even more than you should. So in the book of Job, Job is also one of these ancient characters around the same time as Noah and Abraham. In the book of Job, we hear Job says, I made a covenant, a promise with my eyes that I would not lust after a woman. And the idea here is that he had a wife, and he had his needs should be met sexually in his wife. But for him to lust after a woman is not to commit adultery with a woman, but even to look at her in a sexual way, maybe to look at the parts of her body or to imagine in his mind in such a way that he takes something from her, and he is stealing from her, and he is in some way abusing her. This is wrong. And to lust is to do wrong by stepping over a line that God has set. One of the first things that the first lines that God sets in his law is that you have no other gods. This was at the very beginning of the 10 Commandments. And the people lusted after other gods, making sometimes an idol from them, and sometimes just doing it in their mind, in their head, with their eyes, or with their heart, hoping for, wishing that they had other gods. This is what it means to lust. So Israel spurned God's love, lusting after other gods, trusting in power and wealth. Those are other gods, and we still have them today. And hurting the weak. This is another way that they spurned God's law, God's love. They would hurt the weak. And so then God scattered them. He gave them a consequence. He scattered them among the nations. He sent them everywhere. And yet he kept a faithful remnant. A remnant is a group of people who have been saved and set aside and held on to in order to do something with. So maybe you have a farmer and he sows seed at the beginning of the year, and at the end, at the harvest, he takes the fruit, including the new seeds, and maybe he sells the seeds into the market, but he keeps a remnant, a group of seeds, so that he can use those seeds again the next year. So a remnant is those that are saved for a purpose. Okay? So he kept a faithful remnant, and he promised them the Messiah. We will talk a long time in the next section about the Messiah. God promised a Messiah who would be a prophet to speak good news. A prophet is one who is like a messenger, and a king to crush evil. A king is like a leader and one who provides to the people. That is the role of a king in the Old Testament. He leads, he protects, he gathers an army, and he helps the people in many ways, and he provides for them. And these are in God's revelation, in the way that he showed for the people of Israel. He said that he should be God, the king of the people, but they wanted a different kind of king. And so in the future, though, God promised that they would have not just a king who was a person, but that king would be a person who was also God. That's what the Messiah was going to be. So God promised them the Messiah who would be a prophet, a king to crush evil and rule the earth with justice, and a priest to be sacrificed for sinners. A priest in the Old Testament was supposed to make sacrifices to pay the price for the sins of the people every day or every year or every week. So many sacrifices were happening in the Old Testament. But that Messiah would be a priest who would not make sacrifices, but would be sacrificed for sinners. And God promised to forgive their sins and give them a new heart and a new spirit. so that they would be in some way new people, moving them to walk in his ways. So a new heart, a new spirit moving them. So making them able to move in a new way, no longer to spurn God's love and to reject God's purpose for them to be a blessing, but now moving them to walk in his ways and to be a blessing to all nations. So this section it begins with a scattering of the people, but it also includes a promise that there would be a remnant and there would be a Messiah, a one who would be a prophet, a priest, and a king. This is the picture of redemption that we find in the Bible. God responds to the sin of people. He responds with consequences and hope. He responds by making a covenant with all of creation. And using a remnant, a family line, he sends a Messiah, one who will fulfill the promises and bring justice and allow the people to be a new people who would live in good, peaceful fellowship with God again. This was the picture that we found in the Bible, and it leads us to Christ. We will hear in a minute about Christ. I mean, if you continue these videos, next week, I think Kevin will be recording, and that will take us finally away from the sin and the consequences and toward the new creation. And again, that rainbow is the symbol that we have, allowing us to know that there is hope.